Alright, so welcome everybody. This is Moontime Dweller. I'm here with Legacy Mono Red Storm, also known as Ruby Storm. So, this is a real fun deck I have had online before, but it's been updated with some new cards, and also Gataxian Probe has been banned since, I guess, a few days ago, as of right now. So we used Gataxian Probe in this deck before in the other iterations, years ago when I first had this deck. The replacement is now Overmaster, card from Torment. Next instant or sorcery spell you cast this turn cannot be countered. So to get to the main part of this deck, it's just like any Storm deck. It ends with Grapeshot and or Empty the Warrens. That's the main way to end the game, but the cool thing about this is that this deck can win on turn 2 or 3 very easily. It's a relatively cheap deck, both online and in paper. I believe you can get it for probably about maybe $200. Well, I guess including the Ancient Tombs, it would probably be about $300 in paper, and online, much less than that. I couldn't tell you exactly what I paid for it, but it was much less than that. So we'll get started here. Ancient Tomb is the only non-mountain in this deck. There are 15 lands in the deck. You got 4 of those and 11 mountains. Lotus Petal is technically, it's basically a land, but it's also technically a spell for you. It helps with Storm, and I usually keep them in my hand until I need to use them. Unless I know I'm facing, like Cabal Therapy decks or something like that later on in Game 2 and 3. Next up is Gamble. Gamble is one of my favorite cards in all of Magic. Very rare to see a non-black card that lets you search your library for any card you want and put it in your hand, regardless of the drawback. So this is pretty cool. You discard any card at random, though. But the cool thing about this deck is that the graveyard is very useful, too, and easily accessible. Next up was Overmaster, so we saw that, and you get to draw a card off of it, too. So it's pretty close to replacing Gataxian Probe. It's just that you don't know that the counter is coming. You just know that you can stop the counter that is coming. Next up is Rite of Flame. It's a card that's banned in Modern. So of course it's got to be good in Legacy, right? So you add 2, and then you add 1 extra red for each one of Rite of Flames in the graveyard. So that can add up very quickly. Next up is Abrade. This is a new card that I didn't have in the old deck because it didn't exist. Does 3 damage to a creature or destroy an artifact at instant speed. Great main deck card to have. You never know when there's just going to be turn 1 Chalice, on 1 or 2. On 1, it doesn't really hurt us too much, but on 2, it is pretty brutal. So, actually, Abrade, it would get countered if you had Chalice on 2 anyway. But you have other, options in the sideboard, and we'll get to those later. So, kind of stumbling over my words on that one there. Okay, so next up is the key to the deck, Burning Wish. You can go get a sorcery from outside the game, which is your sideboard, and you can reveal it and put it in your hand, and then you exile Burning Wish. So the cool thing about Burning Wish is that when it goes off and it's not countered, it gets exiled and you get to do whatever you want. You get your sorcery and have fun. If it gets countered, it goes to the graveyard. And like I said, the graveyard is very easily accessible in this deck. So you can recast it very easily. Don't worry if it gets countered at least once, so you'll be okay. But it can get countered multiple times, in a lot of these decks that you're going to be playing against. Desperate Ritual. 3 mana for 2, just one of them. You can use Pyretic Ritual too. It's really the same card. I only use one of them. It's just good for numbers. I've found that I have had several other cards. This is kind of the flex spot in this deck. I've had several other different cards take up this spot. Like I had a 4th Overmaster or Gataxian Probe. I had a 2nd Abrade. I had some other different cards. I can't remember exactly right now in here. I think I put a 2nd Gamble in there for a while, and I had some kind of wipe for creatures in the main deck at first, and it just wasn't really that great. Grapeshot in the main, I have 1 copy just because you do see Surgical Extraction, and you do see what is it, Cabal Therapy, and then sometimes you see Surgical Extraction. I mean, not on Grapeshot. I mean on Burning Wish, and then you just won't have a way to go get your Empty the Warrens or your other Grapeshot that's in the side. So then you'll just be screwed. Then that way you can at least have one Grapeshot in the main deck that you can go find somehow and possibly win. It's a difficult card to face against, with Surgical Extraction and all, but it's rare enough for me to want to take the chance and play. Manamorphose, super expensive card in paper for some weird reason. It's like $10. Online, it's worth damn near nothing. Fantastic card though. Green or red and one. Draw a card. Get it, and you can switch around your mana. Do whatever you want. This is in Storm and Modern, and I think that's why it's really expensive in paper. Next up is the really big part of the machine that this deck tries to create. Helm of Awakening. Spells cost one less. So it does affect your opponents. Everything they play costs one less also. So it's a little bit of a drawback, but you need 6. I think that you need at least 6 versions of this. This is the namesake of the deck. Like I said, Ruby Storm is a name of this deck. This makes everything cost 1 less. So it makes all your rituals cost 1 less and all that. Got 2 Simian Spirit Guides, 2/8, exile it. This is one of your rituals that'll cost 2 mana, with one of these artifacts out. 5 mana for 2 is pretty strong. Act on Impulse is one of the newer cards. I had this in the old version, but it was still one of the newer cards when it came out, when I had this deck last. So it's been several years. You exile top 3 cards until the end of turn. You can cast the cards. Fantastic card. Past in Flames, only got 3 of them in the main. Got the other one in the sideboard for Burning Wish. If you're starting to go off with Storm, of course you want to go get Past in Flames out of the sideboard sometimes. That's another one of the big keys of the deck. Reforge the Soul is our Wheel of Fortune. Sometimes it can be kind of detrimental depending on what your opponent has, and if they get a bunch of counter spells and they have only 1 card in their hand or whatever. It's kind of difficult. This is also one of the newer cards, Hazoret's Undying Fury. So you shuffle your library, exile the top 4 cards of your library, then you can cast any number of those non-land cards that convert mana cost 5 or less, which is our entire deck, and cast them without paying their mana cost. However, your lands don't untap next turn, but we're looking, when you're casting this, you're normally not looking to have another turn. Sometimes you do, and it's not really a big deal when you untap, because you just have a bunch of goblins or something like that, and you've gone off. So that's the main deck right there. And sideboard, actually, let's spread this out here. This will be a lot easier to explain, I think, if I just spread them out. So a lot of sorceries, naturally, because of Burning Wish. As I showed y'all before, only sorcery cards can be gotten with Burning Wish. So mostly sorceries in here. Got a second Gamble for backup. Silent Gravestone's a card that I like because you're not really targeting your cards in the graveyard when they have flashback from Past in Flames, and your opponent is usually targeting cards with Snapcaster Mage and other cards, and I don't know, just a lot of their abilities target the cards in their graveyard, and ours don't. So it's pretty good, and you can tap 4 mana and just screw both graveyards. Grapeshot, like I said, that's the win condition right there. Defense Grid, each spell costs 3 more to cast, except for during its controller's turn. Stops Force of Will, stops Daze, all that stupid garbage. Wear and Tear, love it. This stops, Leyline and Back to the Basics, which really, Back to Basics doesn't really hurt us, but, Leylines, the white and the black one, and, just several other ones, and Wear. Of course, usually I bring this in to replace a Braid if I see a problematic enchantment, and Wear is usually good to go with it because there's usually a problematic artifact in the same deck. Empty the Warrens, yet another win condition right here. Storm, 2 tokens, Past in Flames. We already talked about that one. Cave In is a wipe card. It's kind of like Force of Will. Get an exile a red card instead of paying its cost, and it just does 2 damage to each creature and player, straight up. Another Reforge the Soul, pretty strong. This is a new addition to the deck. that I put in since I got this. This is pretty much Insurrection, if anybody remembers Insurrection. But so you pay 6 mana, gain control of all creatures with power 4 or greater, and then you untap and they gain haste until in a turn. Or you can choose to take all creatures with power 3 or less and do the same thing. This is great for, say if they get an Emrakul out and like show and tell on like turn 2 or whatever, and you just go off, you can steal their Emrakul and win the game that way, or steal their Gristlebrand or whatever, or you can steal all their elves and all their merfolk, whatever you want to do if it wins you the game. By force, just wipe artifacts. I mean, you can't really fight this. This is, I think, one of the Amonkhet sets, one of the most recent ones. A lot of artifacts in that set anyway. Pretty good to spread artifact damage around. It's better than Shattering Spree, I feel like. But both are sorceries. I think Byforce is just really a lot cheaper, money-wise. This is, well, the apex of the deck. Apex of Power. This is a brand new edition, M19. It just came out online. I think it's going to be legal in paper soon. So, 10 mana, exile the top 7 cards of your library. Until end of turn, you may cast non-land cards exiled this way. If you cast it from your hand, which I don't really have a way to not cast it from my hand, I get to add 10 mana of any one color to my pool. So, when you're exiling 7 cards from the top of your library in a Storm deck on, say, turn 2 or 3, after you've gone off as much as you can go off, woo doggy, that might be about probably a quarter of the deck by the time, maybe even a fifth or sixth of the deck, depending on how much you've drawn at that point. That is nuts. So I haven't really had any experience with the Apex of Power yet. I literally just put it in the deck. And Mob Rule I haven't played yet, but I have played several matches with it in the sideboard. And have had access to it, but haven't had the chance to actually win the game with it. Otherwise, that is the end of this deck tech. Thank you for joining me, folks. My name is Ford, and up there in the right corner, I am on Twitter at Ford the Fish. I'm also Moontime Dweller on Twitch. I've started streaming periodically there. There's no real schedule right now, but the videos do record. And also, of course, on YouTube here. Again, thank y'all all for joining me, and hopefully we'll get better and better content as the days go by. Matches coming soon. See ya.